London, 1933. The rain pattered against the fogged windows of Morel's timepieces, a dimly lit shop where ticking clocks filled the silence with an eerie rhythm. Behind the counter, the lifeless body of Augustin Morel, master clockmaker, slumped over his workbench, a cup of tea at his side gone cold. The golden hands of an unfinished clock pointed accusingly to midnight. It was Hercule Poirot, summoned by Scotland Yard, who first observed the delicate irony. A man who measured time for others had run out of his own. Chapter 1. The Silent Workshop. The rain came steadily that evening, a fine mist rolling off the Thames and settling over the narrow streets of Clerkenwell, where craftsmen still plied their trades behind dimly lit shop windows. Gas lamps flickered uncertainly in the damp air, and the smell of coal smoke clung stubbornly to every breath. Clerkenwell was known as London's quarter of horologists, watchmakers, and dealers in timepieces, but that night its heart seemed strangely stilled. In the small workshop of Augustin Morel, one of the most respected clockmakers in the city, an unusual quiet had fallen. Normally, even at late hours, a passerby could hear the faint tinkering of tools, the patient scrape of a file across brass, or the steady whir of a mechanism being tested. Tonight, however, the shop was as silent as a tomb. Beatrice Lyle, the housekeeper, approached the door with a folded umbrella clutched tightly in her hands. She had served Monsieur Morel for nearly 20 years, tending not only to his household, but also to his peculiarities. The Frenchman was an eccentric, brilliant with cogs and pendulums, but forgetful of meals, bills, and appointments. He relied on her for almost everything beyond his craft. Yet Beatrice had grown uneasy of late. Her master had seemed more withdrawn than usual, more secretive, as if guarding a private burden. She pushed open the shop door with a nervous hand. The bell above it gave its usual cheerful jingle, but no voice greeted her. The air was heavy with the scent of oil and brass polish. She moved cautiously across the floorboards, her eyes adjusting to overcome by his late-night labors. But then the terrible stillness struck her, the stillness of a man who had ceased to breathe. The umbrella fell from her hands with a dull clatter. Her scream echoed through the workshop, reverberating off the countless ticking clocks until the entire shop seemed to wail with her. Within minutes, the narrow street outside filled with curious faces. Neighbors gathered, murmuring in low voices as word spread that the famous clockmaker was dead. Scotland Yard was summoned, and with it Inspector Japp, practical, sharp-eyed, and known for his brusque manner. By the time Hercule Poirot arrived, stepping neatly out of a cab with his coat collar turned up against the drizzle, the scene had been secured. Japp greeted him with a mixture of relief and impatience. "Evening, Poirot. Sorry to drag you out in this weather, but it looks like we've got ourselves another one of those cases. Or maybe not. Could be as simple as an old man's heart giving out." Poirot lifted his walking stick delicately and peered into the workshop. His mustaches twitched. "Mon cher Japp, when an old man dies at his work it may be natural. But when that man is Augustin Morel, the most precise of artisans, the guardian of time itself, then Hercule Poirot asks, why has his own time stopped so suddenly?" Japp grunted. "I suppose you'll be wanting a look around then." The two men stepped inside. The atmosphere within the shop was stifling, heavy with the mingled odors of oil, dust, and brass. The clocks continued their cacophony, each marking its own hour, some chiming softly, others ticking like distant hammers. Poirot paused in the middle of the floor, his eyes darting swiftly from object to object, as though the very arrangement of tools and gears whispered secrets to him. He approached the body. Morel's face was oddly peaceful, lips slightly parted, his skin pale but not ashen. Poirot leaned down, his gaze sharp. "Note, Jap. There are no signs of struggle, no overturned stool, no disorder of papers. He was working calmly until the end." Poirot gestured. "Gold. His clocks, his mechanisms, they are unique. A single piece from his hand might fetch a fortune among collectors. And with fortune comes envy, no?" They moved about the room. Poirot's eyes fell upon the great clock against the far wall, a magnificent piece Morel had been restoring for years. Its golden hands pointed to precisely midnight. Poirot frowned. "Curious. Beatrice Lyle claims she discovered him this morning. Yet here the clock insists upon the midnight hour. Why should it strike such a pose?" Jap shrugged. "Maybe it stopped there." "Perhaps." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps someone wished us to believe he died at midnight." They questioned Beatrice in the cramped parlor behind the shop. The poor woman still trembled, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. "He'd been quieter these past weeks," she confessed. "Locked himself in at night. Wouldn't let me clean in the workshop, not after dark. He said he had important work that could not be disturbed." "Did he receive visitors?" Poirot asked gently. She hesitated. I think so. I heard footsteps late one evening. I thought perhaps I imagined it. But I swear I heard voices." Poirot inclined his head as though filing away a vital clue. Jap, less patient, pressed. "Anyone with a reason to harm him? Debts? Disputes?" Beatrice shook her head, but her eyes betrayed something unsaid. Poirot saw it. "Mademoiselle, the truth is the first step toward justice. What troubles you?" Tears welled in her eyes. "He thought I'd been stealing. I swear I never did, but he was suspicious lately. He said money was missing. I was afraid he'd dismiss me." Poirot placed a comforting hand upon hers. "Courage, madame. Such matters we shall consider carefully. For now, you must rest." When at last they left her, Jap muttered, "Every case, it's always the servant, or so they say." Poirot's mustaches bristled. "Non, non, mon ami. That is the thinking of the unimaginative." So ceased, leaving the cobbles slick and shining beneath the lamps. The crowd had thinned, retreating into nearby pubs and homes, but whispers lingered in the damp air. As Poirot climbed into Jap's waiting motor car, he allowed himself one final glance back at the shop window, where countless clocks stared out at the world with solemn, silent faces. The master of time had fallen, but the game of deduction had only just begun. Chapter 2. The Family's Inheritance. The morning after the discovery of Augustin Morel's body dawned gray and somber. A thin mist hung over London, softening the outlines of rooftops and chimneys. The bells of St. James Clerkenwell tolled 9, their solemn echoes mingling with the sound of distant carriage wheels and the occasional motor car rattling across wet cobbles. In the little square outside the clockmaker's shop, a small crowd had gathered once more, whispering about the previous night's events. Within, the workshop remained sealed, its shutters drawn. Scotland Yard had placed a constable at the door, ensuring no one disturbed the scene further. But in the parlor at the rear of the house, the atmosphere was quite different. Inspector Japp sat at a table flipping irritably through a sheaf of documents, while Hercule Poirot leaned back in a high-backed chair, his fingertips pressed together, his mustaches gleaming immaculately despite the damp weather. The door opened, and into the room stepped a young woman of striking presence. She was tall, with dark auburn hair tucked neatly beneath a modest cloche hat, and eyes that shone with a peculiar mixture of grief and determination. She wore a black dress, too hastily donned, Poirot thought, for mourning. "Miss Clara Morel?" Japp asked, rising halfway from his chair. She inclined her head with dignity. "Yes, I am Augustine's niece, his only surviving relative." Her voice trembled, but not with the broken cadence of sorrow. Rather, it carried the controlled pitch of one who had rehearsed her lines. Poirot observed her care in good spirits. He was not ill. And yet, suddenly, he ceases to live. That is enough to arouse the suspicions of the police. N'est-ce pas? Clara lowered her eyes, her fingers tightening around her handbag. I cannot imagine who would want to harm him." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "And yet, all men have their enemies, even those who build only clocks." At that moment the door creaked open again, and a stout gentleman with a severe expression entered, adjusting his spectacles. He carried a leather folder beneath his arm. "Pardon my intrusion. I am Mr. Alfred Cummings, solicitor to the late Monsieur Morel. I believe you sent for me?" "Indeed we did," Japp replied. "We'll need to see the will, Mr. Cummings." The solicitor placed the folder on the table and drew forth several papers with practiced precision. "The will was last amended 2 years ago. It is brief. To wit, the entirety of Augustin Morel's estate, his shop, his household, his collection of clocks and timepieces, and all financial assets, are bequeathed to his niece, Miss Clara Morel." A hush fell over the room. Clara's cheeks flushed a faint rose, though she strove to keep her expression composed. "All of it?" Japp asked sharply. "Yes," replied the solicitor. "There are no other heirs named. The will was duly witnessed and is perfectly valid under law." Poirot's eyes glittered. He leaned forward. "And this estate, monsieur? How much is it worth, approximately?" Cummings pursed his lips. "Difficult to say precisely. The clocks alone, some are of great rarity. A collector might pay thousands of pounds for certain pieces. The shop itself has an excellent reputation. Altogether, I should estimate a considerable fortune." Clara's breath caught audibly. She pressed a hand to her mouth as though ashamed of her reaction, but the flush deepened in her cheeks. Poirot did not miss it. "A great inheritance, mademoiselle. For you, the death of your uncle is not only a grief, it is also the turning of fortune's wheel." Clara's eyes flashed indignantly. "Monsieur Poirot, if you are suggesting—" Her eyes wavered for the first time. "He had no one else, and though he could be difficult, he cared for me in his way. I was his blood. That counted for something, I suppose." Poirot nodded slowly, as though weighing her words on the scales of his little gray cells. "And where were you last evening when your uncle died?" Her chin lifted sharply. "At my apartment in Bloomsbury. I spent the evening with friends. You may ask them if you wish." "Be assured we shall," Japp interjected, making a note in his pocketbook. Poirot rose, smoothing his waistcoat. He walked slowly to the window, peering out at the mist-shrouded street. "Mademoiselle, forgive me one final question. Did your uncle ever speak to you of enemies, of quarrels, of, how shall we say, matters of business that disturbed his peace. Clara's lips pressed together. At last she whispered, "He mentioned a collector, a Mr. Pembroke, I believe. He came often, pressing Uncle to sell him a certain clock. Uncle refused. He said it was too dangerous to part with. I never understood what he meant." Poirot turned, his eyes bright. "Ah, Monsieur Pembroke. That name I know." "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." The interview concluded, Clara rose to leave. At the door she paused, her voice trembling for the first time with something that might have been genuine fear. "Monsieur Poirot, if you discover that Uncle was indeed murdered, will you tell me at once? I should like to know the truth, however terrible." Poirot bowed his head. "The truth, mademoiselle, is a delicate mechanism, like the spring of a clock. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot winds it with care." When she had gone, Jap exhaled noisily. "Well, there you have it. A fortune drops into her lap the very night the old man dies. If that's not motive, I don't know what is." Poirot returned to his chair, eyes closed in meditation. Motives, lanes of Clerkenwell, where Morel had lived and died. Jap grunted as the car rolled to a stop before a grand Georgian house with polished brass knockers and spotless steps. "Here we are. James Pembroke. Rich as Croesus, likes to throw his weight about. Owns half the antique shops in Bond Street, I shouldn't wonder. He's been badgering Morel for years." Poirot stepped delicately from the vehicle, adjusting his cuffs and smoothing his mustaches. His eyes flicked up to the tall windows where velvet curtains hung like heavy lids. "A man who covets is a man who suffers, mon ami. And when he suffers, sometimes, he acts." They were received at once, ushered by a butler into a hall lined with paintings and cabinets of curiosities. The air smelled faintly of beeswax polish and old wood, mingled with the sweet tang of cigar smoke. Everywhere gleamed evidence of Pembroke's wealth: marble busts, Persian rugs, and along one wall, a row of tall clocks, each ticking in grave solemnity. Their host awaited them in the drawing room. James Pembroke was a man in his 50s, broad-shouldered and ruddy-faced, his thinning hair brushed back in a vain attempt at elegance. He wore a smoking jacket of deep burgundy, and in one hand he clutched a glass of brandy, though it was scarcely past noon. His eyes, sharp and restless, darted to the visitors with something between challenge and disdain. "Inspector Jap, Monsieur Poirot." His voice was cultured but carried an undercurrent of irritation. "I suppose this is about Morel." "It is," Jap replied bluntly. "You heard already?" "Of course I heard. News travels quickly in our circles. Dead at his bench, they say. Well, the man was obstinate enough to work himself into the grave. Serves him right." Poirot inclined his head. "You did not esteem him highly, monsieur?" Pembroke's laugh was short and bitter. "Esteem? I esteemed his work, not the man. He was a genius, I'll grant you that. But he was also a miserly, stubborn old fool. He had in his possession one of the most remarkable clocks ever built, and he refused, flatly placid, though his eyes sharpened. You were very determined to possess it, monsieur. I am a collector, Poirot. Collectors live for such things. My collection is the finest in England. Clocks from Paris, Geneva, Augsburg. But the Horloge du Diable would have been the jewel of them all. And he hoarded it, locked it away in that dingy shop, letting dust settle on its gilt casing, when it should have been admired by connoisseurs, by the world. Jap leaned forward. When was the last time you saw Morel? Pembroke's gaze shifted. A week ago. I called on him. Yes, I admit it. I pressed him again for the clock. He refused me again. I lost my temper, perhaps. Said things I shouldn't have. But murder. He gave a bark of laughter, harsh and brittle. Come now, Inspector. You don't seriously imagine I poisoned him over a clock? Poirot's voice was mild. And yet you admit to quarreling. That is most interesting. Pembroke's face darkened. Morel delighted in tormenting me. He said the clock would never leave his possession. He said it was too dangerous, too cursed. Rubbish, of course. Old-world nonsense. But he gloated over my disappointment. Poirot tilted his head. Tell me, monsieur, did you know that the Horloge du Diable is missing? There was a long silence. The brandy glass trembled in Pembroke's hand. Missing. Impossible. It is so. The case is empty. Someone removed it from his workshop either before or after his death. For the first time, Pembroke looked unsettled. His bluster faltered, replaced by something tighter, more guarded. I know nothing of that. If it is missing, then someone else has taken it. Perhaps your good inspector should look to the servants. They always have sticky fingers. Japp scowled. We'll look where we please. And I'll remind you, Mr. Pembroke, theft and murder often walk hand in hand. Pembroke rose suddenly, striding to the mantel where an ornate clock chimed the quarter hour. His shoulders desire. And yet he may not kill. The truth is like the mechanism of a clock. It turns silently, invisibly, until at last it strikes the hour. Then, and only then, do we hear it. The inspector grunted. You're saying Pembroke's all noise and no bite? I say only this. We must wait. We must observe. For if the Horloge du Diable is indeed the key, then whoever possesses it now has revealed his hand. And Hercule Poirot will be there when the clock strikes. As their motor car carried them away from Mayfair, the great city loomed around them. Markets bustling, newsboys shouting headlines, the clatter of trams and taxis merging into a single urban heartbeat. But in Poirot's mind, another rhythm sounded, the steady tick of a missing clock, each beat drawing them closer to the truth. And somewhere in that rhythm, hidden among suspects and secrets, lay the mark of a murderer. Chapter 4. The Housekeeper's Secret. The late afternoon light slanted through Clerkenwell's narrow streets, catching on the rain-slick cobbles and throwing long shadows across the shop fronts. By the time Poirot and Inspector Japp returned to Morel's house, the mist had thickened once more, clinging to the eaves and drifting like pale smoke between chimneys. The workshop lay silent, guarded by a constable at the door, its windows shuttered, its clocks ticking unheard within. In the cramped kitchen at the back of the house, Beatrice Lyle sat hunched at the wooden table, her fingers knotted in her lap. The housekeeper was in her late 40s, plain-faced and weary, with hair scraped back into a tight bun. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, though she tried to sit upright as the two men entered. The teapot before her steamed faintly, though she had not poured herself a cup. Poirot approached with a gentle smile. Mademoiselle Lyle, forgive this intrusion. I know your heart is heavy, but I must ask you some questions. She nodded quickly, almost gratefully. Of course, monsieur. Anything that can help. Japp remained standing, flipping open his notebook. His tone was brisk. Truly. I had served him for 20 years. I knew his moods. And yet, you stayed, Poirot murmured. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. Where else would I go, monsieur? I have no family left, no children. My wages were small but steady. It was a life of sorts. Jap interjected. You didn't notice anyone visiting him, say, in the evenings? Her hands twisted. Sometimes. I thought I heard voices. Once I heard footsteps in the hall after I had gone to my room, but when I asked him in the morning, he told me I was imagining things. Poirot leaned closer, his dark eyes searching hers. And money, madame. Your master accused you of stealing, did he not? Her face went crimson. He thought so, yes. He said coins were missing from the till, but I swear I never took a penny. Tears welled again. I may have borrowed once, years ago, when my brother was ill, but I paid it back. He never forgave me, though. He looked at me with suspicion ever after. Jap's pencil scratched across his notebook. So he suspected you, and you had reason to resent him. Beatrice's voice rose in protest. No, I cared for him. He was stern, yes, but he relied on me. Who else kept the place in order? Who else cooked his meals, paid his bills? He was like family in his way. I would never harm him. Poirot tapped his fingertips together. Mademoiselle, you must be frank with me. Did you, in these past days, handle his accounts, his papers? She hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the dresser against the wall. Poirot followed the glance. With a soft step, he rose and crossed the room. The top drawer yielded a stack of envelopes and folded papers, receipts, bills, and letters. Poirot spread them neatly upon the table. Among them, one paper caught his eye. A receipt for a purchase of brass fittings dated 3 days prior. The signature scrawled at the bottom was unmistakably Augustin Morel's. Yet Poirot's eye detected a very thought of discovery. Jap frowned. Unless she thought she'd inherit something. Servants sometimes do, you know. Beatrice shook her head. He left me nothing. I knew it. He made it plain. Everything would go to his niece. Always it was Clara this and Clara that. I was invisible beside her. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And yet, mademoiselle, invisible people sometimes see the most. Tell me, did Monsieur Morel speak to you of Clara? With affection? With distrust? A shadow crossed her face. He said she was impatient, that she pressed him about his affairs. Once he told me, if I die tomorrow, Clara will waste all I have built. Those were his words. Poirot's mustaches twitched thoughtfully. Très intéressant. He rose and paced the little kitchen, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the worn tiles. The kettle hissed faintly, forgotten on the stove. At last he turned back to Beatrice. Mademoiselle, last night, did you prepare for him the tea? Her eyes widened. No, monsieur. I had gone to my room. I heard him moving about in the workshop. The door was locked. I never saw him again. Poirot studied her face, then nodded slowly. Bon. That will be all for now. You must rest. But remember, the truth has a way of surfacing, like the pendulum that always returns to its center. As they stepped back into the narrow hall, Jap muttered under his breath. She's hiding something, Poirot. I can smell it. Those forged receipts. What's to stop her forging poison in a cup? Poirot shook his head. Non, mon ami. She is frightened, yes. She hides small things, pitiful things. But murder? I do not think so. Still, she is important. For she has ears to hear what others do not, eyes to see what others overlook. We must not dismiss her. They moved into the workshop once more, where the ticking of countless clocks. Chapter 5. The Doctor's Prescription. The evening fog wrapped around London like a shroud, as Poirot and Inspector Japp made their way to Harley Street. Here the noise and grime of the city seemed held at bay. The buildings stood in stately rows, their pale facades immaculate, their brass nameplates gleaming. Behind these doors practiced the physicians of London's elite, men who spoke with certainty, wrote in precise script, and billed their clients in figures that ensured discretion. They ascended the steps of number 47, where a polished plaque read, Dr. Alistair Greaves, M.D. A brass knocker gleamed in the gaslight. Japp rapped firmly, and within moments a maid admitted them, ushering them into a waiting room upholstered in sober green leather. It smelled faintly of carbolic soap and pipe tobacco. The ticking of a wall clock seemed overly loud in the hush. Poirot smoothed his gloves and leaned toward Japp. Harley Street, mon ami. Here are men accustomed to command. A doctor may know more of his patient than any priest, and with less need for confession. The door to the consulting room opened. Dr. Alistair Greaves appeared, tall, spare, in a dark suit with a starched collar that pinched his long neck. His hair, iron gray, was swept back neatly. His face was angular, his eyes pale and cool as glass. He greeted them with measured politeness. Inspector Japp, Monsieur Poirot. I was informed you wished to see me regarding poor Morel. A shock, though, not entirely unexpected. He was not a young man, and his constitution was frailer than he would admit. Japp's brows rose. You don't say. And yet he worked long hours, strong enough to carry heavy clock cases by all accounts. Greaves gave a thin smile. Appearances deceive, Inspector. Morel suffered from what I would call a nervous weakness. Palpitations, occasional fainting, stomach complaints. I had long urged him to take rest. He was, alas, obstinate, present in his blood. A silence fell. Greaves's face remained expressionless, but his knuckles whitened slightly where his hands gripped the back of a chair. Is that so? He said at last, his voice measured. Then perhaps the stubborn man overstepped his dose. I warned him repeatedly. He was careless, secretive, even with me. I cannot be held responsible if he took more than prescribed. Japp leaned forward. Or if someone slipped it to him without his knowledge. Greaves's gaze cooled further. Are you suggesting that I poisoned my own patient, Inspector? Ludicrous. My reputation is unblemished. I serve families whose names you read in the papers. Do you think I would risk it all for an eccentric clockmaker? Poirot raised a finger. But perhaps there was more between you and Monsieur Morel than the relation of doctor and patient, eh? Tell me, doctor, did he owe you money? A flicker, there and gone in the man's icy composure. He was occasionally tardy in settling accounts. I extended him credit, but it was trifling, nothing of consequence. Trifling, Jap repeated skeptically. Yet I hear you've been investing in property, Doctor. Takes capital, that. Morel's little debts might not mean much to you, but a rare clock now. Something like the Horloge du Diable. Would that not tempt a collector's purse? For the first time, Greaves's mask cracked. His lips tightened. I am no collector. I cure illness. I do not hoard curiosities. If Morel chose to waste his talents on mechanical toys, that was his affair. Poirot's voice dropped, smooth and unyielding. And yet, Docteur, you knew of this clock, did you not? Morel boasted of it, even to you. The silence stretched. Finally, Greaves turned away, crossing to the desk where a silver stethoscope gleamed. Yes, I knew. He showed it to me once, years ago. A grotesque thing, with a wish to kill. He would leave no trace. Yet in Morel's blood the poison lingers, obvious, almost clumsy. It is untidy. Jap grunted. So what are you saying, that someone stole the stuff from him? Perhaps. Or perhaps he knows more than he says. I must reflect. They began their walk down Harley Street, the mist curling about them. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, head bent in thought. At that moment a figure detached itself from the shadows, a boy, ragged, with ink-stained fingers. He thrust a folded note into Poirot's hand and vanished before Jap could bark a question. Poirot unfolded the paper. The writing was hurried, uneven. Ask the doctor about the night bell. He lies. Poirot's brows rose. He folded the paper with exquisite care, slipped it into his pocket and smiled faintly. Mon cher Jap, he murmured. It seems the night has struck another hour. And someone, it appears, wishes Hercule Poirot to listen very closely indeed. The fog closed around them like the ticking of unseen clocks. Chapter 6. The Clock Strikes 13. The fog had thickened again, rolling through Clerkenwell like a gray tide. Lanterns burned weakly in the mist, their glow haloed, their light swallowed as though the night itself were hungry. Poirot and Jap stood before Morel's workshop once more, its shutters drawn, its windows blind. A constable shifted uneasily at his post, stamping his boots against the chill. Jap lit his pipe and muttered, I don't like this business of anonymous notes. Smells like a crank to me. Poirot adjusted his hat and smiled faintly. Oh, it smells, mon ami, like the breath of truth. Whoever sent this note knew something about the night bell. We must investigate. Inside the workshop was dark, save for the glow of their lanterns. The air smelled of oil, old wood, and the faint metallic tang of machinery. Dust motes drifted in the beams of light. Around them, clocks of every size loomed. Grandfather clocks with carved pediments, bracket clocks on high shelves, fingertips. Then he turned to the door leading into the narrow passage beyond. The night bell, where is it? Jap nodded to the constable. Together they traced a wire that ran along the skirting board, leading from the street door to a small brass bell mounted high on the workshop wall. It was tarnished, its clapper worn smooth with years of summons. Poirot studied it intently. Curieux, he murmured. If Morel were alone and locked within, and the bell rang, who came to him that night? Jap frowned. So you think someone rang the bell, gained entry, and... A sudden sound cut him short. A chime. Soft, deliberate, resonant. It came not from the night bell, but from somewhere deeper in the room. A second chime followed, then a third, clear and mournful, echoing off the stone walls. The men froze, lanterns sweeping wildly across shelves and cases. "Good Lord," Jap muttered. "What's that?" The fourth chime rang, then the fifth, each note more uncanny in the silence. Poirot stood motionless, his head tilted, his eyes half closed. The sixth, seventh, eighth. Still the sound came, like the voice of some hidden sentinel. Then the ninth, the 10th, the 11th, the 12th. And finally, one more, the 13th. The workshop seemed to exhale in the silence that followed, the air heavy with dust and dread. Even the constable had gone pale. Jap's pipe slipped from his lips, extinguished on the floor. Poirot's voice was low, almost reverent. "Voila. The legend speaks. The clock strikes 13. But the thing's not here," Jap spluttered. "It's gone. We saw the case empty with our own eyes." Poirot nodded slowly. "And yet, the chime is real. Therefore, one of two things must be true. Either someone has hidden the mechanism here in this house, or someone wishes us to believe in ghosts." They searched feverishly, opening drawers, peering behind cabinets. Poisons, and this cursed clock. "I feel like we're chasing shadows." Poirot smiled faintly. "Chasing shadows is sometimes necessary, until one finds the man who casts them." He paused before the workbench where Morel had been found slumped. The lamp still bore its burn mark. The tea-stained cup still rested on the tray. Poirot bent close, sniffing the rim. Then he touched the porcelain with a fingertip and raised it delicately to his lips. "Bitterness," he murmured. "Yes, but also sweetness. Not the bitterness of digitalis alone. Something else. Something to mask it. Ah, the murderer is clever indeed. He makes his poison a draught of deception." Jap grimaced. "So what now?" Poirot placed the cup gently back upon the tray. "Now, mon ami, we wait for the next chime. For whoever struck 13 tonight will strike again. And when he does, Hercule Poirot will be ready." As they extinguished the lanterns and stepped once more into the foggy street, a sound carried faintly on the night air. A single chime, low, mocking, distant. Poirot halted, his breath misting before him. "Do you hear, Jap? The clock is speaking still. And when the clock speaks, a man must listen." The fog thickened, swallowing the street. Somewhere unseen, time itself seemed to stutter, as though the world were keeping an hour too many. And in that stolen hour, a murderer waited. Chapter 7. Clara's Confession. The fog of the previous evening lingered into morning, clinging stubbornly to London's rooftops. At Clerkenwell the streets seemed washed in grey, the bells of nearby churches tolling like mournful sentinels. In Morel's narrow house, the constable on duty admitted Poirot and Jap to the parlor, where Clara Morel awaited them. She rose as they entered. Clara was in her mid-20s, slim, with dark hair pinned neatly beneath a modest cloche hat. Her dress, though tasteful, bore signs of wear: a frayed hem, a faint patch at the sleeve. Clutching the handkerchief, her knuckles white. Poirot settled opposite her, his gaze gentle yet penetrating. "Tell me, Clara, your uncle intended to leave you his estate, did he not?" Her lips parted, then pressed shut. Yes, he said as much. I am his only family. And yet, you pressed him for details. The housekeeper has told us you urged him about his affairs impatiently. Clara flushed. Beatrice exaggerates. I only wished to know where I stood. You do not understand, monsieur. Life is not easy for a young woman alone. My work as a typist barely pays for my lodgings, and my uncle, he promised. He said I would not be left wanting. But he delayed, always delayed. I feared he would change his mind. Poirot's mustaches twitched. And so you quarreled with him. Her eyes filled with tears. Once, only once. I accused him of cruelty, of making me wait. He grew furious, shouted that I was ungrateful. But afterwards he softened. He said the clock, the cursed clock, was the reason for his delay. He spoke in riddles. Jap leaned forward. What did he say exactly? She hesitated, her voice trembling. That when the clock struck 13, all would be decided. That until then, his affairs must remain untouched. I thought it was nonsense, the rambling of an old man obsessed with his work. Poirot exchanged a glance with Jap, his eyes narrowing. Yet, mademoiselle, the clock has struck 13. We heard it ourselves last night. Clara gasped, her handkerchief falling to the carpet. Then, it is true. The curse is real. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Or it is very cleverly arranged. Tell me, mademoiselle, how did you know the clock struck 13? Only those within these walls could have heard it. She froze, color draining from her cheeks. I didn't. I only repeated what he said. Poirot leaned closer, his voice soft as silk. No, mademoiselle. You spoke as one who believed it had already happened. Help. I loved him, in spite of everything. But that sound, it haunts me still. A silence hung heavy in the room, broken only by the distant tolling of St. James's bells. Poirot rose slowly, his eyes unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle. You have spoken with courage. Yet, you hold something back. There is more, you know. Clara's lips trembled. I cannot. Poirot bent low, his voice barely above a whisper. But you must. For truth, like time, cannot be stopped. When it strikes, it strikes. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. Then hear it, monsieur. The truth is, the clock is not cursed. It is stolen. And I know who took it. Jap sprang forward. Who? But Clara pressed her hands to her face, sobbing. I cannot say. If I speak, I am ruined. You do not know what you ask. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, grave and compassionate. Mademoiselle, the choice is not whether you will speak, but when. For the clock has already struck 13. The hour is upon us. Her sobs filled the narrow room, echoing like chimes across the silence. Poirot turned away, his expression shadowed. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. But within the house the air grew heavier still, thick with secrets, with guilt, and with the inexorable approach of truth. Chapter 8. The Watchmaker's Apprentice. The narrow alley behind Morel's workshop smelled of damp stone and coal smoke. Poirot's polished shoes clicked upon the cobbles as he and Jap approached the side entrance. The constable on duty saluted, then nodded toward a thin young man sitting upon a crate, head bent, hands busy with a small pocket watch. The lad looked no older than 21. His hair was dark and unruly, his clothes worn but carefully brushed. His fingers moved with astonishing delicacy, coaxing the tiny gears into alignment as though they were living things. Go home, I mean. The boy hesitated. His gaze flickered to Poirot, then back to Jap. I walked the streets for a while. I was troubled. He had been short with me that day, spoke sharply, scolded me for mistakes I did not make. I thought, perhaps he had lost faith in me. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Or perhaps he feared you had grown too curious, mon garçon. Etienne's brow furrowed. Curious? Yes, Poirot said softly. About the horloge du diable. You knew of it, did you not? Morel guarded it like a miser guards his gold. But you, his apprentice, you would have seen things others did not. The young man's lips parted, then closed again. His hands twisted nervously at his side. I knew he had something hidden, a clock unlike any other. He spoke of it only once, when he had taken too much wine. He said it was dangerous, that its chime brought misfortune. I thought it was only a story. Poirot's voice dropped lower. Yet 2 nights passed, that clock was struck. 13 times. And now your master is dead. Etienne paled, his throat working. You heard it too? Then it is real. Mais oui, Poirot said. It is real enough. Tell me, Etienne, where is the clock now? I don't know, the boy cried too quickly. I swear it, monsieur. When I left, it was hidden, as always. I never saw it. Jap snorted. And yet someone got to it, someone who knew the workshop well, someone who knew the secret places. Poirot tapped his temple. Précisément. You, Etienne. You know every board, every bolt. Did your master not entrust you with the hidden workings? The boy's eyes darted toward the wall behind them, the wall that separated the workshop from the narrow stair to the loft. Poirot followed the glance with keen satisfaction. Ah, Poirot murmured. So there is indeed a secret. A cavity in the wall, perhaps? Honor. He said the clock must be revealed only when the 13th hour struck. And it has struck now, yes, but my oath still binds me. He trusted me. Poirot studied him in silence. The boy trembled beneath his gaze, yet stood firm. At last Poirot sighed, smoothing his cuffs. Very well, mon enfant. I will not force you. Yet. But heed this. Your silence endangers you more than any words could. Already suspicion gathers around you. Do you wish to be seen as the thief of the horloge du diable? Or worse, the murderer of your master? Tears welled in Etienne's eyes. He whispered, No, never. I could not. Poirot's expression softened. He placed a hand lightly on the young man's shoulder. Then trust me. I seek only truth. When you are ready, you will speak. Until then, be wary, for others will seek to silence you as they silenced your master. Etienne shivered, glancing fearfully toward the shadowed stair. I have felt it already. Someone watches me. Last night, I returned to fetch my tools, and I heard a footstep behind me. I turned. No one was there, only the ticking of clocks. But I know. Someone follows me. Jap grunted. Could be your nerves, lad. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or could be our murderer, tidying away loose threads. The apprentice swallowed hard. Then what shall I do? Poirot adjusted his hat, his voice firm. You will stay close to the constable. You will not wander alone. And above all, you will guard your tongue until the moment comes when you must speak. Do you understand? Yes, monsieur. As they prepared to leave, Etienne suddenly reached into his waistcoat and withdrew the pocket watch he had been working on. He pressed it into Poirot's hand. Take this, he whispered. It was the last piece he gave me to repair. There is something strange about it. Listen when it strikes. Poirot examined the watch, heavy and ornate, with a dial of fine enamel. The case pale morning light. It was a narrow house on Farringdon Lane, its shutters drawn, its steps swept with meticulous care. A brass plate beside the door read, Dr. Jonathan Pembroke, physician and surgeon. Poirot mounted the steps with his usual delicacy, Jap at his side. He tapped the knocker gently, as though wary of disturbing the house itself. The door opened to reveal the doctor, tall, thin, with sandy hair swept neatly back and pince-nez perched upon a long nose. His manner was polished, but his eyes betrayed unease. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, he greeted them smoothly. You wish to speak further about poor Monsieur Morel, I presume. A dreadful loss. A dreadful shock. Indeed, Poirot said softly. May we enter? The doctor ushered them into a consulting room where a faint smell of carbolic hung in the air. Cabinets of glass-fronted bottles lined the walls, each neatly labeled. On the desk stood a mortar and pestle, alongside ledgers filled with neat medical script. Poirot's eyes flickered across the bottles. Digitalis, laudanum, tincture of opium. His mustaches quivered ever so slightly. Doctor, Poirot began, seating himself primly. You attended Monsieur Morel in his final hours, did you not? Pembroke inclined his head. Yes. When the housekeeper summoned me, I came at once, but alas, it was too late. His pulse was weak, his skin clammy. Nothing could be done. And you concluded it was heart failure, Poirot said. At the time, yes. He was a man of advanced years, worn by labor. It seemed natural. Jap leaned forward. And yet poison was found in his tea. That doesn't trouble you, Doctor? Pembroke's eyes flickered, but his tone remained steady. It troubles me greatly, Inspector, but I assure you I did not administer it. Poirot smiled faintly. No, of course not. Yet you kept many substances here, substances which Pembroke bristled. It is a scientific pursuit, Inspector. Mechanisms fascinate me. I studied horology at university before I turned to medicine. Monsieur Morel and I often exchanged ideas. Poirot approached the clock, running a finger along its polished wood. This, Doctor, is no mere hobby. This is craftsmanship. Did you not long for Morel's secret, the horloge du diable? Pembroke's composure faltered. I confess, yes. He spoke of it often. He claimed it was unique, a clock that struck beyond 12, a marvel of engineering. I begged him to show it to me. He refused, said it was too dangerous, too precious. I thought it mere eccentricity. But when he died, I wondered. Had he finally attempted it? Had he unlocked its secret? Poirot's gaze sharpened. And if he had, you would have desired it. Perhaps enough to hasten his death. The doctor's face went pale. No. I may covet knowledge, but I am no murderer. Poirot leaned closer, lowering his voice to a silken whisper. Then explain, Doctor, why Morel's teacup bore not only digitalis, but another substance, one that masks bitterness. A compound most rare, unless one knows the art of chemistry. Pembroke's hands clenched. I do not know. Perhaps someone else. No, Poirot interrupted gently. You know, because you made it. You experimented here, mixing medicines and toxins. And you tested them on animals, perhaps? On clocks. On clocks, Japp barked. Poirot tapped the tall clock. Listen, Inspector. This mechanism is infused with more than gears. See the residue on the brass? A crystalline powder. Our doctor has been experimenting with sound, with vibration, with chemical reactions triggered by the striking of bells. Pembroke's mask cracked. His voice trembled. You do not understand. It was not malice, it was science. Engraved case glinting in the dim light. Tell me, Doctor, do you recognize this? Pembroke's eyes widened. Where did you? That was Morel's. He showed it to me once, laughing, said it was a toy. But I knew. It was a prototype. The key to the great design. Poirot nodded slowly. Just so. And last night it struck. Not 12, not 13, but 1. The beginning of another cycle. Another secret unlocked. Pembroke's face drained of color. Then God help us. For it means the clock is active. And if it is active, more will die. Poirot slipped the watch back into his pocket, his eyes glittering. Not if Hercule Poirot can prevent it, Doctor. But mark this. If you have concealed aught else, if you have misled me again, I will know. And when I know, I shall not be gentle. The doctor sagged against the bench, his frame trembling. You must believe me, I did not kill him. But there is one thing I have not told you. Poirot inclined his head. Speak. Pembroke whispered. The clock is not lost. It is hidden. I know where. But if I tell you, I sign my death warrant. Poirot's voice was calm, implacable. Then, Doctor, you must choose. Silence and peril. Or speech and perhaps salvation. Pembroke closed his eyes. His lips moved soundlessly as though in prayer. Then with a shudder he whispered, It lies beneath the floor of the workshop, in a vault. A vault only the apprentice and I knew. Poirot's gaze flickered with sudden fire. Ah, enfin. The truth begins to chime. At that instant, the tall clock in the corner gave a single resonant stroke. The 3 men froze. Poirot's eyes narrowed. It seems, messieurs, that time itself hastens us toward the end. And the clock, always the clock. 13th chime. is born not of sorcery, but of design. Monsieur Morel created a mechanism to strike 13. A jest, perhaps, or a challenge to the tyranny of the 12-hour dial. Yet that sound has been used as a cloak for murder. Etienne gasped. But monsieur, we all heard it. Last night, the night before. Précisément, Poirot interrupted. The chime we heard was not the clock itself, but its hidden bell, concealed beneath the floor, triggered by wires and levers. The murderer wished to remind us of the legend, to terrify us, to cloak their crime in mystery. Poirot paced slowly, his hands behind his back. And now we come to motives. Each of you had one. He turned to Beatrice. The faithful housekeeper, so faithful that she falsified the hour of death. Why? Because she feared suspicion might fall upon the niece, whom she loved like her own child. But you, madame, are no killer. You lied out of fear, not malice. Beatrice flushed, tears welling in her eyes, but said nothing. Poirot faced Ashcombe. Monsieur le collectionneur, you coveted the horloge du diable. You offered vast sums. You pleaded. You schemed. But greed is not enough. On the night of the murder, you were far from London. Your alibi is strong. You are guilty of avarice, but not of blood. Ashcombe's lips curled bitterly. A pity. I would have given him fortune for that clock. Poirot turned his gaze to Dr. Pembroke. The doctor stiffened. Ah, doctor, you possessed both knowledge of poisons and an obsession with resonance. You quarreled with Morel. You experimented with substances most deadly. But though you played with death, you did not administer it. You wished to study the clock, not destroy its maker. Your guilt is of arrogance, not of murder. Pembroke let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging. Poirot's eyes moved to Etienne. The apprentice flinched. Mon pauvre enfant. You loved your master, yet feared him. You appear as heart failure. And when whispers of poison arose, you clung to the legend of the clock, speaking of curses, of 13 chimes. But in doing so, you betrayed yourself. Clara's eyes widened, terror dawning. I did not. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low, relentless. But you did. You stood outside that night, yes, but not to plead. You rang the bell. He admitted you. You argued, he refused you again. And so, while he worked, you poured the poison. You left before death came, thinking the legend would shield you. But you miscalculated. The clock does not conceal guilt. It reveals it. A heavy silence fell. Clara's chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes darting from face to face. At last she sprang to her feet, her voice breaking. Yes, I did it. But you do not understand, I had no choice. I was drowning in debts, hounded by creditors. He had promised to help me, to settle my future. But he mocked me, called me greedy, unworthy. He would rather give the clock to his apprentice than secure my life. Was I to be cast aside while he tinkered with cursed toys? I only wanted what was mine. Her words rang bitterly in the workshop. Beatrice wept softly. Etienne stared in horror. Poirot bowed his head. And so you took what was not yours, the life of your uncle. But mark this, mademoiselle. Inheritance gained through murder brings not fortune but ruin. The law will see to that. Japp stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming. Clara shrank back, then crumpled into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. As Japp led her away, Poirot turned to the others. His face was grave, his voice solemn. Thus ends the tale of the Horloge du Diable. Not cursed, not supernatural, merely a marvel of wheels and springs. And yet, see how men and women in their fear and their greed give to such objects the power of fate. It is not the clock that strikes the 13th hour. It is the human